Callejas to come up here. She's the Vice President of the Legislative Assembly of El Salvador. And Congresswoman? Okay. Thank you so much. You prefer here or the microphone's here?
I will take it here. Good morning. I'm sorry, I just want to know. I will manage the presentation from here. What should I do? Okay, thank you very much. Excelentísimo señor presidente de la Corte Suprema de Justicia, Henry Alexander Mejía, y señores magistrados que nos acompañan. En camino está el señor presidente de la Asamblea Legislativa, el diputado Ernesto Castro, y también a mis colegas que están acá presentes. Buenos días. Señores diputados y diputadas de las asambleas legislativas y los congresos y parlamentos que nos acompañan, señor presidente del Foro Parlamentario de Inteligencia y Seguridad, Robert Pittinger, muchísimas gracias. Señor director de la Agencia Nacional de Desarrollo y Diseño de Nación, David Rivar. Excelentísimos señores presidentes, diputados y jefes de las delegaciones de los diferentes parlamentos, excelentísimos señores embajadores y honorables jefes de misiones diplomáticas acreditados en nuestro país, honorables señores de representantes de organismos internacionales que hoy nos acompañan, invitados especiales que participan en este foro parlamentario de inteligencia y seguridad, señoras y señores. Okay, I'm gonna switch right now, just because most of you speaks English. So my name is Suecy Callejas. I'm the first vice president of the Legislative Assembly here in El Salvador, and for more than a decade, I've been working with the President Nayib Bukele in his team and the First Lady Gabriela de Bukele next to the President Ernesto Castro. So it is a privilege today to speak to the leaders from more than 22 countries across the world. So welcome to El Salvador, but I want to spill the tea with you about our history in El Salvador, so I'm going to switch again to Spanish. So, déjenme contarles una historia. Esta historia es sobre el país más pequeño de Latinoamérica, pero también el país más violento de este hemisferio, y de cómo pasó de tener 18 homicidios diarios, de matar a sus jóvenes y a sus mujeres, de extorsionar a sus emprendedores y de expulsar a más de 3 millones de salvadoreños, a convertirse en el segundo país más seguro de toda Latinoamérica. El milagro de seguridad que hoy está viviendo El Salvador ha sido producto de la gobernabilidad que el órgano legislativo está brindándole al órgano ejecutivo, pero también, y no vamos a ser negligentes en negar que esto realmente tiene que ver, bienvenido señor presidente, Ernesto Castro, que esto también tiene que ver con una gran bendición de Dios y con el apoyo del pueblo salvadoreño. El milagro de la seguridad no ha sido un golpe de suerte, sino que se ha construido a través de 3 grandes pilares, que es la voluntad política de la nueva generación de funcionarios públicos, porque para cambiar tenemos que dejar de hacer las cosas como se hacían antes, y eso implica también una renovación de todos los funcionarios que están al frente de las instituciones del Estado. El segundo es el trabajo articulado para acelerar la refundación de este país, dejar de esperar, como bien lo mencionaba el señor presidente Ernesto Castro en sus palabras, dejar de esperar 15 años para discutir leyes que nunca llegaron a ver la luz. Y 3, un pueblo decidido. Y creo que esto es una de las cosas más importantes, que en las urnas el pueblo salvadoreño salió nos dio su confianza, pero esa confianza va acompañada también de la responsabilidad de cambiar nuestro país. Por muchos años, El Salvador fue la capital del homicidio. Ya no me voy a detener mucho en esto porque ya el señor presidente Ernesto Castro y también el ministro Gustavo Villatoro hablaron de esto el día de ayer, pero 2015 fue un año terrible para nuestro país porque fue el más violento de nuestra historia y nosotros encabezábamos las listas de países más violentos del mundo sin estar en un conflicto armado, civil o sin estar en un conflicto de guerra. Simplemente las calles de El Salvador eran el escenario de la violencia social extrema, en donde los corruptos políticos de ese momento hacían los tratos y el pueblo salvadoreño ponía la sangre. En 2015 la tasa de homicidios por cada 100.000 habitantes fue de 106.3, mientras que, comparándolo con 2024, esta tasa bajó a 1.9. Además, en 2015 se registraron más de 6.656 homicidios y en 2024 se registraron 114 homicidios, de los cuales 112 fueron resueltos por las autoridades, teniendo una tasa de resolución, la corporación, es decir, la Policía Nacional Civil, de un 98.2% de efectividad en la resolución de los delitos, por supuesto acompañado esto del Ministerio Público. En agosto de 2015 morían un promedio de 30 salvadoreños por día. Durante 10 años, después de 10 años, en 2025, se vive una realidad completamente diferente, ya que en todo el mes, en ese mismo mes, en agosto de 2025, se registraron 4 homicidios. De los 31 días del mes, en 27 no hubo homicidios. 18 homicidios diarios se promediaron durante el año 2015, mientras que en 2024 este promedio bajó a 0.3 homicidios diarios. El rol de la Asamblea Legislativa ha sido fundamental para cambiar esa oscura realidad a través del respaldo a las estrategias de seguridad del Plan Control Territorial que el gobierno del presidente Nayib Bukele ejecuta. Pero no estamos hablando solamente de cifras y datos a secas, sino que debemos comprender que hay millones de salvadoreños que hoy pueden vivir en una verdadera paz y tranquilidad. Pero cuando hablamos de gobernabilidad, yo creo que muchos acá podemos ser abogados o habremos estudiado ciencias políticas, y creo que al momento de estarlas estudiando, yo al menos cuando estaba en la universidad me acuerdo perfecto que hacía esta diferenciación de un concepto tan abstracto de qué es la gobernabilidad versus tener el gobierno. Y la verdad es que este concepto tan abstracto logró posicionarse en la cabeza de cada uno de los salvadoreños, teniendo la conciencia que se puede tener el gobierno y no tener la capacidad de gobernar. O, como ahora es en El Salvador, se puede tener el gobierno y también la capacidad de gobernar. Entonces, sí, la gobernabilidad es la capacidad de un gobierno de ejercer su poder para atender las demandas de la sociedad de manera eficaz, estable y legítima. Siempre debe estar en búsqueda del bienestar social de su población. Por tanto, como Asamblea Legislativa trabajamos articuladamente junto al Ejecutivo para que el Estado sea más eficiente y así que pueda maximizar el impacto positivo de estas políticas públicas. Y para comprender mejor el rol que estamos desempeñando, quisiera enumerar 4 acciones claves de esta
four key actions that this legislative assembly is implementing. The first one was approving the state of exception. Second was hardening the penalties for gang members or terrorists, whatever the name you want to use is. The third is approving the budgets for security, and the fourth was renewing our judges. And we work along with the Supreme Court of Justice for that. Just between the 25th and 26th of March 2022, we had 88 homicides in the country, and in this terrible situation, the President Bukele sent a request for approving the state of exception to the Legislative Assembly. Immediately, President Castro summoned extraordinary meeting, and by 3:41 a.m. of Sunday, March 26, 2022, we approved the exception regime with 66 votes in favor. If you remember, by that time, President Castro told you that we were 84 representatives in that assembly. Now we're 60. The opposition wanted to spread fear to the population, and that was very criticized by the international cooperation in general, and outside of the country that was heavily criticized because they were spreading lies about this state of exception. But with the time, and thanks to God, who confirms realities, we now see that this constitutional and legal tool has been very important to safeguard the life of Salvadoran families. The exception state existed in the constitutions since 1983, which was, by the way, approved by the right parties in the country. It existed already, but the old legislative assembly decided that they were not going to use the necessary tools because it was easier for them to make a profit out of the suffering of Salvadorans. The legal base of the state of exception is the Article 29 of the Salvadoran Constitution, which hasn't been changed, by the way. The suspended guarantees that were temporarily suspended are the freedom of meeting and respect to mail and communications, so authorities could take back the control of the territory to guarantee the security of the population. And it was also stated that arrest and detentions could take longer in order to conduct an investigation. So we receive a lot of criticism and attacks from everywhere, but truth is that homicides, extortions, femicides reduced year after year, and the Salvadoran population is witness to this miracle. Salvador was at the top of the list of the most dangerous countries in 2015, but from 2019 we lose positions in this list, and in 2021 we were out of that list. In the last 10 years, when the opposition governed, they just had one day without homicides. Since President Bukele came to office in June 2019, now we count 1,060 days without homicides, and out of those days, more than 900 days without homicides have taken place in the state of exception. Another measure that we have taken at the Assembly is hardening the punishment for the criminals. Some people had to flee their home, and some others didn't have that possibility, and they fell in the hands of the gangs, and that's why we changed laws to optimize judiciary work, so terrorists were no longer able to torment Salvadoran families. We live actually a long period when Salvadorans kill judges, they murder judiciary assistants, they murder members of the police, and they also murder members of the military. Now, those who are the members of gangs will have a punishment of 20 or 30 years of prison. Before that, the punishment was just 5 years of prison. Financiers of gangs will pay with 40 and 45 years of prison, and the previous sentence was 9 to 14. Gang members who commit sexual aggressions or raping will be punished with between 20 and 30 years of prison, and the previous punishment was just 10 years. Those who are related to drug trafficking will be in prison for 20 or 30 years, and the previous punishment was just 15 years. If a gang member commits extortion, they will have to pay with 20 and 30 years of prison, and the conspiracy to commit extortion is now punished with up to 15 years, and before that it was up to 5 years. Now we have protected the name and information of the judges, and this is because the terrorists used to threaten the judiciary personnel to get better outcomes. And in the case of crimes committed by gang members, they are no longer able to request alternative measures to prison. Gang members do not deserve other measures than going to prison. Sexual aggressions and raping are no longer overdue. We had a lot of femicides, but if we compare the rate that now we have in 2025, we have reduced femicides by 97% in El Salvador. So we can assure with the data that we went from being a country that just said that wanted to protect its women to a country that actually protects its women. We know that we have lost many lives because of gang violence, and that number might reach up to 200,000 homicides in a country with 6 million people and 21,000 square kilometers. We have been criticized because we have put millions in jail, but thanks to that, millions of Salvadorans, we now live with freedom. This Legislative Assembly has passed the general budgets for the country. Actually, we are studying the budget for 2026 nowadays, and since we arrived in 2021 and always with a special focus on the Salvadoran security, we know that one of the biggest problems was the security, so we have been increasing the budget for security year after year. Now the security forces have boots, uniforms, helmets, Starlink equipment for connectivity, IT equipment, vehicles, and we have renovated the different facilities. I know that this might not be a big achievement for many of you because this is something that should have been always there, but we Salvadorans, sadly, in the hardest years of violence, we had a police department and armed forces with very, very bad conditions. They didn't even have boots to go and walk. And during the COVID pandemics in 2019, while the government of President Nayib Bukele was working to safeguard the life of Salvadorans, former representatives of the Legislative Assembly, including the justices of the Supreme Court of Justice, were working for their own interest. And at that moment, we Salvadorans understood that all the sectors had their different representatives, but these representatives were not actually representing the people.
It's important that when we arrived at the Legislative Assembly, we began the recreation of our country, just like the Salvadoran people entrusted to us. So in May of 2021, we requested that on this first plenary session that we held, right after we were sworn in, a point in the agenda where we were able to remove the justices from the Constitutional Chamber, and we approved in September a series of reforms to the judiciary career so that we could administer better justice. President Bukele tweeted at that time that if we aren't able to remove corrupt judges, we will never be able to save the country, because social violence, corruption, It doesn't stay in a single space. It requires a whole system to be able to exist and to prolong itself over a period of time. And here is where I'd like to add a fifth key action of the Legislative Assembly, and that is to promote equal opportunities. To build a country that is safe, we need only to take coercive action, but rather preventive ones as well, and that is exactly what we're doing. We have backed the initiatives from President Bukele and his First Lady to provide access to health, culture, security, right to water, pension funds, and help family economies. On a day-to-day basis, we are announcing 2 new schools that are being renovated and remodeled as we speak. We have a library that is open 24/7, a library that is in the main center of the historic downtown center of our country. That is the heart of our country, which is not only a building, it is a monument that attests, a monument to the knowledge that speaks about what we want in our new country. We also have the largest marching band in all of Central America, made up by 1,000 young men and women from all of the country, from every single economic segment. We're about to inaugurate a new hospital, Hospital Rosales, and one of the only third-tier hospitals we have in our country, and we're also we're also hosting for thousands of international events. Added to the fact that thousands of Salvadorans that had to run from this country, that had to flee from this country to protect their lives and that of their families, are now coming back to El Salvador to live. They are now investing and they're reactivating our nation's economy. Public spaces that used to be completely sequestered because you couldn't walk anywhere at night now have come back to the population, have been given back to the Salvadoran population. Companies, entrepreneurs may grow economically because they no longer have to pay extortion to gang members. And of course, this whole reconstruction process is basic to respect the sovereignty of each nation. The power that isn't used is not power. And those politicians in the past had the power to change the country, but they simply chose not to. I ask that we never behave like the politicians of the past in El Salvador, and that we take example from everything from them of everything that should not be done in this country. We now use the power that the Salvadoran people have bestowed upon us to transform El Salvador into a safe and attractive country for investment and tourism. As a matter of fact, UN Tourism said this year that El Salvador was placed in the second world place and first in Latin America in touristic performance during 2024. Myself, I am so very grateful for this opportunity, but I just want to make sure that I ask every single one of you parliamentaries from the different countries to use your power and to study your constitution and to always listen to the mission that your country has given to you in benefit of your country. Be the generation of parliamentaries where our countries may leave development. Let's make decisions that are necessary. And I promise you, you will be critiqued. You will be booed even. They will speak ill of you even. I promise you that. But I can also promise you that what is worth more is the fact that the families of the countries you represent may live in peace and may be able to grow economically and may be able to do better. Study your laws, study your constitutions. We have managed to reduce homicides to 93% in our country in less than 5 years by using the rules of the game, changing them when it's been needed, but always supported by the Salvadorian people. We didn't come up with anything new in this Legislative Assembly. The difference is that we now have the will to change our country, and that is what is obvious. President Bukele and our First Lady entrusted several missions onto us. President Castro was entrusted with some things where we all helped. I was given other tasks. Well, of course, I've had support from my team, my great team of congressmen and women, and that is to take care of early childhood, of our children, of our families, of our adolescents, of our youth. We have backed initiatives proposed by our First Lady, the law of being born with care, growing together, and the Love Turned into Food Act to protect all Salvadorans from their early childhood and every phase of their lives. Because what worth it would it be if we begin to clean the territory of these criminals if we're not going to plant anything? El Salvador is a new country, and along with God and the Salvadoran people, we will continue to work so that this road is irreversible, so that we don't go back. We need to make sure that every single government agency is working together. The lie, the checks and balances thing that it means we should all be fighting against each other will not take our countries or not remove our countries from underdevelopment and violence. Lying is never going to do anybody any good. However, working together in a coordinated fashion does not mean corruption or even corruption money under the table. It just means that the state will be more assertive and will understand its population much better. To be able to change, you need a whole country with a willingness to do so. You need officials that are clear and that know that any time that we're sitting in that position, anytime we're in those offices, and anytime we're given a microphone and we're able to speak between ourselves and to the population is short. We don't have 15 years, to discuss laws and make decisions, because if we found all these laws collecting dust in desks. Ladies and gentlemen, we must be active. We must deliver. If this was a large corporation, a large private corporation, then we would not have time to think whether or not, we have time to update a product or not, or whether or not AI will be used or not, because another company would do so immediately, and that's what we owe to each of our nations, to our population, particularly in our case for Salvadorans. The time that we have is short, and we must work together on a single country goal that is larger than ourselves, even an objective that is larger than any political party that we represent. It is larger even than we ourselves can think. The objective is our country. That's our target, and for however short time we have in these chairs, we must deliver. I want to finish by saying that this government never sat down to negotiate with terrorists, with gang members. We never sat down on the same table with terrorists. This government stopped listening to any advice that was given that never worked throughout the decades. And sure, we were afraid. Every single one of us was scared. But also, thank the Lord, we found the bravery and the courage to do it our own way, to solve this problem of social structural violence. And I promise you, nobody knew how to do it. We didn't even know how to do it. I think that just many of us were just simply convinced that we needed. I think a lot of us just kind of started believing that, we just needed to wake up, pray to God, and hope that we didn't get killed somewhere along the day. And just we kind of had accepted that we needed to coexist with these criminals. Politicians in the past used their power, but not for good, not to change our country, and that's what we changed. And if each of you in your own countries changes that, I'm certain that the quality of life for each of your populations will improve. Never forget, we're doing this with the support of the Lord, but also with the support of a sovereign nation that has placed us where we are. Let us not be ungrateful, and let us deliver the work we can in the whatever short time we have. Thank you.
good legislative work